visible? Is it visible to you?
Yes, we can see, ma'am.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, ma.
Today we are going to discuss the second block from DCE 3, that is short story writing. See, today we are going to discuss about writing for children's. When it comes to the writing of children's, we have to be very careful. And also we have to step down to the level of the children's, and there are certain things we have to keep in our mind when we write for the children's and their mindset. So here in this block, we are going to study about appropriate themes, and also we are going to study about the fantasy, language and illustrations, and discuss about the what all the things we are going to inculcate or transmission of values in this block. See, when we write for children's, we have to keep certain things in our mind. It's a special branch of literature, and also it requires certain qualities which are different from adult literature. And also in the same way here we can see that a child is different in his attitudes, response from the grown up people. And also the child is far more sensitive, impressionable, perhaps also more imaginative, in the sense that he can lose himself more easily in a dream world of his own creation. So writing for children is not that easy, because we have to set a mind, or we have to go down to the level of a child and imagine when we were children's, and how we have listened to the stories from our grandparents or from parents, or we have read certain books where we have read Arabian Nights or Aesop's tales, or certain folk tales which are related to our culture or to our traditions in that way. And also in ancient form of storytelling was completely oral. It transmitted from one person to another person through orally. Like that, we have heard the stories and it has been modulated according to the person, and he might have added certain things in narrating the story. For example, when it comes to the Indian writing or the classical, the ancient Indian classics were rich in the source of material, and also we have come across lot of traditional folk tales or kathas and the stories which has been told by wandering storytellers or narrators and by our grandmothers in our houses. And also almost all the stories are from classics like the great epics which has been written in by preceders, that is Ramayana and Mahabharata, the Panchatantra, the Katha Sarita Sagara, and the folklore of different religions. And also we can see that modern creative writing for children could have been very rich compared to the past year. There is a lot of difference from the classical form of writing to the present form of writing. So we might have heard certain stories which our children might not have heard about them. And also almost all the stories which we have heard or read or associated with our tradition, our culture, and our religion. I hope you can recall the stories which has been heard by you or you might have read when you were young. There is a lot of difference between the stories which we are reading right now and the stories which are being read by us in the past. And also, we can see here that children's literature, for example, in India, there are certain magazines or newspapers where we come across the stories which has been written by some writers for the children. So the literature which has been written in India is, so writing for children at present is largely limited to the children's page in the Sunday editions of many leading newspapers and the children's magazines which are published all over the country. And also there are certain books which talks about the native background and cultural atmosphere of the period. And also we can come across some books only on Sundays, though a page in a newspaper is purely meant for the children's. There it is related to their creativity, and also some children who are interested, they even write there, and some authors also write a story which is related with moral ethics and values to impart them with culture, tradition, and the ethics of the society. So in that way there are only few literature which talks about the children's stories or poems or narrative uh, novels, we can say abridged novels. And some of the important children books with native background and cultural atmosphere can be seen. Some talk about the Ramayana, Mahabharata, and also in westernization cities, there too they have certain books which talks about their own tradition. So when you look up to your own country's literature, you also come across certain books which has been written to the children's with more number of pictures, few sentences which has been written below that. In that way, why children's literature has not flourished in India? Because there are certain reasons why in India it has not flourished. Not only in India, but even in other countries, the same situation is faced by the people, I think so. So one of the some of the issues which we can come across here is that the reluctance of many parents to consider children's books an essential item of family expenditure. This might be the one reason they think that it is expensive to buy the storybooks for their children. And also, it will be a burden for those parents to buy extra books for the children's story. And the other point is that the absence of well stocked and well frequented libraries for children in areas where they live. There may be scarcity of libraries in the locality where the people are residing. There might not be public libraries for
Madam,
children.
slides are not moving.
It's not moving,
Uh,
but it was your. See, wait, I'll check once again.
now I'm moving, madam.
Now it's moving.
Yeah.
Oh, then I can reduce the size so that it will move. Now, is
Yes,
it
yes.
moving?
Yes, yes.
Ah, so why children's has not flourished in India, and even it, the situation may be existing in other part of the country also. I can say all over the world, maybe. See, there are certain parents, the certain group of people who feel that it is a burden to buy books for the children's, and also the public libraries are not there in the locality where they live, and also there are reluctance of publishers to invest in non-profitable book productions, because nowadays we come across people are commercialized, they think in the profitable way. So if they print the books of children's, it might not be of that income for them, so they think to publish or to invest the money in the children's books where they're not going to get any kind of profit from those types of books. And also we can see that, see, when we think about the theme, what would be the theme for different age groups? So it varies from age to age. So when the same theme cannot be incorporated in the stories which we are writing for all the age group from 2 to 15 years, we can see, and it varies from age to age. So we can see the different age groups, what kind of stories interest them and they get fascinated toward them. So for the example, just 2 to 3 years, they love to view picture books with the minimum of text. So even the rhymes attract the kids of this age. And also they prefer to have colorful pictures and with minimum text and a right there. So when we move on to the next age group, that is 4 to 6 years, they prefer to listen to short stories which is in very simple language, and also animal stories and also real life stories that can be read to children, fantasies, fairy tales, folk tales. See, we might have heard about the hare and the tortoise, lion and the fox, and the fox and the grapes. Like that, many of the stories which are associated with the animals where they teach us moral stories. There are some values are imparted through these stories to us. And also the age group from 7 to 10 years, it is a group where it is eager to know many things, and also they like to listen to the stories which read out to them, and also and to read the stories by themselves. But till the age of 6 they will be listening from their parents, the teachers, their elders, or their siblings. But when they move on to, or when they are 7 to 10 years age, they would prefer to read by themselves, and also they prefer certain stories which are suitable with subjects like adventure, school explorations, travel, animals, fantasy, space, odyssey, mechanics, which behave like human beings, like that. So such kind of stories interest the age group of 7 to 10. And the other next group which comes under 10 to 15, see, they are all voracious readers, we can see this age group. And also they prefer to read certain subjects like human interest stories, serials with a set of characters and their adventures, and also in which the child participates imaginatively. Even they start imagining in the place of the characters, and they talk and they visualize themselves in that particular character. And also some stories about heroic personalities, real adventures, mountaineering, or it's related to the history of their country, or travel, seafaring, dacoits, bandits, police, stories of children's courage, self-reliance. All these things attract the age group of 10 to 15. So they want more adventurous or some heroic deeds which has to be there in the stories, where a police is chasing a bandits or the thieves or the dacoits, or seafaring voyages, adventurous. So something realistic they prefer to study in the age group of 10 to 15. See, when we come across all these age groups, their themes undergo changes. They, according to the growth of the child, even the interest undergo changes. That it will not remain the same. So when we write a story, we have to keep certain things in our mind, that we are writing for the kids, and the language which we use should be very simple, where there should not be more phrases, idioms, and the vocabulary should be very simple, and so that they can understand. So we have to keep always in a mind to which age group we are writing this story. So when we start writing, we have to keep certain things, as I told. Books for small children need lively and colorful illustrations and very little text in large letters. See, when we write for the age group of 2 to 4, we have to keep in mind that where there are more pictorials and also only few lines have been written. It should be very colorful because the children get attracted towards the colors. And also we might have seen when they have written the rhymes. The pictures are so beautifully designed. Children get attracted towards that and they learn the rhyming scheme in that age. And also, we recall even when we have grown up, also the rhymes what we have learned when we were young. And also, the stories on familiar or fanciful subjects with numbers and letters attractively printed. So, when you narrate a story, it should be very familiar. There should be clarity in the picture, and the numbers and letters should be very attractively printed so that as soon as they see, they can identify what exactly it is. And the next point is that stories must be absorbing enough to hold the child's attention. So the stories what we write for the children's always should have the attentions of the child. In that way, it has to be written. The child get absorbed into the story. And also when we narrate some stories, it should be homely and which it should be identifiable characters in regional setting. See, we should make the child familiarize with the culture, the tradition, and the atmosphere in which we have grown up. See, we can't narrate a story which is not our culture, so it will get distracted and it will not be able to understand what we are trying to convey it. So it should we should create the homely atmosphere to the child when we narrate a story. So it should be very regionalistic. So when we write a story to a child, it should be completely based on the tradition and the culture and the regional setting where it is grown in the beginning. But later, because after that we have read Alice in Wonderlands, Gulliver's Travel, many other stories talks because by the time they would have known what the world is. So in the beginning, we convey or try to impart certain values and ethics to the child through the moral stories, which is in a religion or in a region. So, certain adventure stories which are associated with sea, mountaineering, or air, which can be which introduces to the child the history and geography of that particular region. So, when it comes to India, there were many kings and queens who had ruled the country, and many invaders had come to India. And so, we connect with those stories how the great warriors had fought to get the freedom from the invaders. And also, it familiarizes us with the geography and as well as the background history of a country. So next comes the fantasy. So fantasy is more important when it comes to the children's point of view because they love fantasy more than the any other things. So fantasy is geared to magic as to modern science, encounters with holy men. See, we might have, but nowadays, when it comes to the present situation, we might have seen some movies which are associated with the space, the aliens, and certain creators which talks about they are the one who impart certain values and they come from other planet to earth, and like that we have seen certain stories in the Hollywood and Bollywood, we can say, in movies. So nowadays more number of fantasy movies has been directed, and also certain some of the writers are writing the fantasy tales also, which is associated with magic and modern science and some holy man becomes the character in that. So, what are the things? The next arises the question of values in children literature. How we are going to impart the values in the children's literature. So, the first thing is tradition. Tradition plays a very important role in modeling the child's character, we can see. So, because every tradition has its own values and its own system, which has stood as a replica or an obedience, respect for elders, and for truth, because we value our systems, we are try to teach our children's obedience to respect the elders and always speak the truth. And also in modern times, these values are somewhat weakened. Nowadays, we can see that in the youngsters, the values like respecting the elders or telling truth, and they've lost all these values, we can see, because they're becoming more modernistic and they're neglecting their culture, their tradition, and their religion. So, but it has to be strengthened through imparting in the stories. So, therefore, we have to introduce a new set of values as to be introduced in a new way, because we have to move with the pace of the time. So, always, whenever we write a story, we have to keep in mind the time for whom we are writing and for the purpose why we are writing and who are the readers. So, a writer never writes for himself, because he is writing for the world, the readers. So always he has to keep the reader in his mind whenever he write the stories or novel or poem, whatever a piece of literature is written. A writer never writes for himself. Always he writes for the reader. So he has to keep the reader in his mind whenever he writes a story. So keeping all these things in his mind, because now he is writing for the present generation, so he has to keep the present generation in his mind, and it has to be, yeah, the values has to be imparted in such a way that it will reach them. And also the next point is that for modern world, stories that grip the imagination of the young are a national lead. It can serve as a models of behavior for the children. So apart from this, we also have to impart nationalism, patriotism in the child, and they should become the models of the patriotic stories and the struggle of freedom. All these things should become the models for the behavioral modulations in the children. And certain stories, when translated into medium of the film or the TV, can have a powerful impact on young mind. See, some of the stories what we have read have been transmitted or have been translated into the medium, and that is either movie or to the TV serials. And there we should see that the originality has been depicted, and there should not be variances in the direction or production of that particular true story. So it should be true to the reality what they are trying to convey. And the next point is that we have to recall certain essential features of children's stories. When we write stories for the children's, we have to keep these features in our mind. See, every story should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. See, plot is very important. Plot is considered as the heart and soul of a story. So, but a long story can have even two or more subplots. See, when we select a story, for young minds, it should be of one incident where it tried to teach them morality, or it might be with subplots also. But if it is a long story, then you can have even two or more subplots. But if it is a single plot, a small a incident or something can be taken up. So scenes and character should be vivid and recognizable. See, when you select a scene or the characters, there should not be more number of characters, and it should be recognizable by the child. Just think about the short stories which we have heard, that is tortoise and air, where only two characters are there, like that. So sequence of stories with a common theme or characters can be taken up. So certain stories, there is a sequence, this one after the other stories, one incident in one part of the story and the second incident takes place in another story, like that. You might have read about Aesophia's tales, or the in our country, when it comes to India, there are many stories which are written in Panchatantra, Katha Sarita Sagara, and there were certain books which talks about the series of uh, that is the books which has been written for the children's. So sequence of stories with a common theme or characters. For example, Mahabharata, it has been divided into many subplots, and each story has been taken up and it has been published or printed in a form of a comic books. And also stories around real events. Always you have to keep in your mind that the stories run around the real events, because literature is considered as the mirror of life. So we are talking about the society in which we are living. So almost all the things what you write should be real to the events. And also stories of pathos and courage and suffering, all these becomes the theme in the stories. What happens to a pious person, or if it is a, if a person is evil, what all the problems he is going to undergo, like that. And also language is very important in children's stories, because the simplest language has to be used in writing. So, simple language means it should be always direct in action and natural dialogue in the familiar idiom of childhood, or therefore the hallmarks of good writing for children. So, the simplest of the simple language has to be used in narrating the stories of the children's. And also it should be direct. There should not be an indirect speech to be incorporated in writing the story. Always there should be a direct connection between the characters. And also we have to use simple words, not too long words should be used. They should be very short and not too very long words. And also small sentences should be used, and even the sentences should not be very lengthier one. And also we have to avoid glitches, and because phrases should be avoided unless they are used in a dialogue to reflect the way some people talk. And still phrases should be avoided. We should not incorporate more number of phrases or idioms in the narration. So it should be a simple talk which takes place between the characters. And also when it comes to the script writing for children's films, the children's film, there are some film societies or children's film society, they welcome the development of the entertainment of children in India or Germany, Canada, England, the USSR, and some of the other countries where they have similar film societies. And also they should be written with a professional manner, and that is with directness, which can be followed by the technician, cameraman, etc. See, when they write the script for the movie, it has to be present, it has to be placed in front of the CFS, that is Children Film Society, and once it is approved, and it can be produced. So, some of the countries are producing the films for the children. And so, what are the points we have to keep in mind when we think about writing the stories for the children? Is that the first thing is we have to choose proper themes for your target age group. For what age group you're writing? What all the themes you can take up for writing, and also choose proper themes for your target age group. The first thing, when we decide to write a short story, we have to plan to whom we are writing, to what age group we are writing, what theme we can choose, and then decide the plot. So, the first thing, always we have to be very careful that the theme for which target group we are selecting. And the next comes the appeal to the child's sense of wonder and fantasy. The second point is very important because the children get attracted towards some wonder and fantasies. So we have to keep these two things in our mind and write. So the language, use simple and direct language in your stories. So whenever you start writing a story, you have to keep in your mind that the language is very simple and it's direct. And also, you have to make the child involved in the stories. So you have to seek to engage the child's imagination and interest in the story. Always, you should not drift out of the story or go away from this main storyline. So always you have to keep and tackle the attention of the child in the story. So in that way you have to move ahead in the story. So whenever a story is written, there should be certain ethical values, and also judiciously and with an eye towards contemporary society and its needs. So, whenever we write a story, we have to keep the society in our mind. See, the present society is fast moving, it is digitalized, technological, technology oriented, and everything is a globalized village we can see. In that way, we should be always judicious to the theme what we are selecting, and it should be associated with the present generation. So for the present generation, we can't write the stories of 60s or 40s because they'll not be interested in that. And also make copious or use of pictures and illustrations. So you have to keep in your mind that there should be some pictures which illustrates or talks about the particular incident. So in that way we have to keep the attention of the child in the story. Okay. Do you have any queries related to this first unit?
No, ma'am.
Yes?
No, ma'am.
No,
No,
ma'am?
no, no, no. I don't have any question related to this unit.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. Then I can go ahead. Next important unit is fantasy. What do you mean by fantasy? What do you have understood about fantasy?
It is about imagination.
Yeah?
Imagination, to imagine when you
Yes,
write
yes.
something,
Yeah.
yeah, like an real world.
Yes, unreal world people or creatures. So it talks about a fantasy world. Just think about Disneyland in America. It is the man made creation which has become real. And some of the stories, like He Man, Spider Man, all these stories are considered as fantasy. See, fantasy is creating a world of fancy, a world in which unreal people and creatures roam about doing unexpected things and encountering unreal adventures. And also, sometimes the characters are real, but they are surrounded by an atmosphere of magic and unreality. So, the fantasy is nothing but the illusionary world or the dreamy world in which the creatures or the people are living, where the unexpected things happens. You might have seen the movie that is Harry Potter. Everything happens in a magic. So it's a magical world we can see in the Harry Potter. In the same way, there are certain movies where we come across unreal adventurers which are taking to the characters who are real, or where they are surrounded with certain atmosphere which is magical and unreality. So that is called as fantasy because children get attracted towards fantasy. So fantasy makes a deep and lasting impression on young minds and has therefore played a large and effective role in fictions for children throughout history. See, even we have heard about the fantasy stories about demons or Cinderella or some magical things happening to a person, and where they have encountered a demon in a forest, or some are invisible, some are visible, like that many fantasy things happens in the story because these fantasy elements retain in the mind of the children for a longer period of time. And so from the past till now we can see that in the history there are many fantasy stories which try to show some ethics and values. See, there are different types of fantasy forms of fantasy stories which has been written by the great writers of the world, we can say. And also they every country has its own stories which are associated with fantasy, we can say. And also in most of the children's stories we come across fantasy as a subject in children's stories, and also children get attracted towards the fantasy. Not only do they live in a fantastic world of their own, they also find it easy to enter into other people's worlds of fantasy. They start imagining, they create their own fantasy world by listening to these kind of stories. So this age, we can say, when a writer of short stories for children, they see that it's a struggle, we can say. It's not that easy as the write for the adults or the teenagers, but it is very difficult when they start writing for the children's. So it's a struggle, we can say. It's not that easy because they can't write whatever comes to their mind, and also they have to keep in their mind that they are writing for the children's because it is the base where they teach the values, the ethics, the culture, the tradition, the customs. Everything is taught through the short stories. That is truth. What is truth? What happens to a person if he lies? And we can grow up the child in a proper manner where we can impart good attitudes or behavior which will mold the behavior of the child. So always there are, we have to keep these things. So writing for children's, they need special gifts, we can see that they should be gifted. And also you need that to have a child's mind. When you start writing for a child, you have to step down to the level of a child. You shouldn't think like an adult. You shouldn't imagine certain things from your point of view. So you have to step down to the level of a child and think according to his understanding. So forms, there are different forms of fantasy stories which has been written, and what all these forms are like that. So children's love to listen to fairy tales, which fascinates and ennoble them since they are innocent and fair-minded. The triumph of good over evil leaves a deep impression on the minds. See, because a wrong message is conveyed in a story, remains in the mind of a child forever. Because of that, always we should be very careful in writing a story. We have to step down to the level of a child, because we teach them what is right, what is wrong in that age. See, what we teach them when they are young, it continues throughout their life. So we are the designers of their future. In that way, we have to be very careful. See, for example, when Plato, the Greek philosopher, he said that the poet should be banned from the commonwealth. But it was mistaken by many philosophers. They thought that the poet should be banned. No, but he said that because during that time they were teaching the young minds Iliad and Odyssey, which was very difficult for the young minds to understand, because the characters in Iliad and Odyssey are god and goddesses. Some characters have been portrayed as evil. So in that way, he doesn't want it, though the poems should be taught to such an age group. In that way, he has told that. So in that context, he has told that the poet should be banned from commonwealth. But and also because that is the age, because we teach that God is a power, or where whatever we have to offer a praise or like that. So a kind of fear is taught to the young minds in that age. So in that way, so the good and evil leaves a deep impression on the minds of the child. So we have to be very careful when writing the stories. And also they love to listen to folk and fairy tales. There have been some original products in their field of fantasy. Some recent works of fantasy are Gulliver Travels, Arabian Nights. See, when compared to the stories which were written in the ancient time and the stories which came over through the ages, there is a lot of differences. When we come across some stories which involves fantasy, adventures, voyages. These all things took place only after the Renaissanceian period. But until the Renaissanceian period, almost all the stories were related to the Bible or to the customs and the tradition. But when man started rethinking, discoveries were done, and they started taking up voyages. Adventurous stories came into existence. So, some of the fantasy stories which were being written to the children, though Gulliver's Travel is not was not written for the children's, but it was abridged and converted to the children's to read. That is Gulliver's Travel, and also you might have read about or heard about Arabian Nights. All these stories talks about the folk and fairy tales and fairy tales which are associated with the original products of the field of fantasy. But by the end of the 19th century, the there came a different kind of fairy tales which were written during that time, like Pinocchio, Alice in Wonderland, and the Wizard of Oz. These were the stories which were written in 19th century. But you might have also heard about the story of Cinderella and Aesop's tales, and all these stories talks about certain fantasy which was entirely different from the stories which were written and during the 16th or 17th or 18th century. So these type of stories came in the 19th century. So, when it comes to the present century, we can say that they talk about more about space. Without space, no stories have been written in the present, we can see. So, now the present age or the 20th century is called as the age of space. Like the great writers Julius Verne and H.G. Wells have written a number of stories which are associated with the space and the creatures of the space. So now we step on, as I told you, now we step on to the space age, which is the present century. And also there are imaginations has acquired new wings. In the past, the demons, the Rakshasas were the evil characters in the Puranas and the holy scripts, and the great heroes who empowered them is taken by space like monsters and Superman. But when you just look back to the stories, what you have heard or read, and the stories of the present century, the characters have underwent changes. In the past, we used to call them as demons or Rakshasas in the holy scriptures or the Puranas and or the epic stories. But the same characters have been replaced in the present century by the monsters and the Superman. And when it comes to the contemporary authors have written fairy tales with a new twist. See, there is a shift in the writing of the stories, but they have given a modern touch to the stories. You might have heard about how the tortoise and the A story has taken a modern twist. In the same manner, the magic band still holds its sway, like in the stories of J. Williams and Jane Yolen, are the one who have given a new get up to the fairy tales in a new test, we can see. See, they have given a modern touch to the old fairy tales, and they have written according to the perception of the modern society. And also, even now, there are certain writers who have brought the animal worlds to the modern times jungle book, like the animal fantasy world has been written. Even in the Gulliver's Travel, we come across some of the characters are animals and who impacts human values and ethics, which has to be inculcated by the human beings. So some fantasy of modern times are like the books which has been written by like books like Jungle Book, Just So Stories of Rudyard Kipling, Beatrice Potter, Kenneth Grammy, Margaret Sharp, C.S. Lewis, Laurel Alexander, Michael Bond, Robert Lawson, and others. These are the some of the writers who have brought the animal fantasy world in the in the writings of short stories. So there are these are the prominent writers who have written the fantasy world of animals in the short stories. And next is that there are certain guidelines for new writers. See, for the beginners, we have to have certain set of rules and regulations and principles in writing the short stories. What are the things we have to keep in mind when we start writing a short story? Or if I'm a beginner, what all the points I have to keep in my mind? Because without having certain framework, we can't become a writer. So what is the fantastic element you are going to choose? The first thing is that making a choice of the plot or the storyline, to whom you're writing, what story you wanted to see, what values or ethics you wanted to portray through this particular story. So that is the fantastic element you're going to choose. What you're going to choose. The first thing is that you have to make a choice of the element or the story or the plot which you're going to write. So next comes the choice of characters. See, when you're writing for the young minds, there should not be many characters where they get confused, because we are not making the child to get confused. We are trying to make them recall the characters. So, do you want your characters to enter a fantastic world or meet fantastic characters? See what's going to happen, how your story is going to move. Either your character is from the fantasy world, or is he going to come across the fantasy in his life or any other incidents where he'll get connected with this fantasy world. So the second thing you have to keep in your mind. And the next thing is that, do you want to describe happenings in an imaginary animal world? The next point is that where this imaginary things or is going to take place. Either it's going to take place in the animal world or in the human world. So that is the major thing. So if you have chosen only the human characters, then it's through the human character. The imaginary or animals should be introduced. So the second thing is that, where do you want to describe happenings in an imaginary animal world? So the third thing is that, is your story line moves in the imaginary animal world? You might have heard about Animal Farm or the Jungle Book. Some of the books which has been, where the animal world try to impart certain humanitarian qualities. And next thing is that, do you choose the miraculous finding of treasure? So either it is a treasure hunting or you are in quest of something else, and what do you decide to identify or go in search of that. So that is the third point. And you went in search of something else and you'll come to the real world like that. So in that way, where you'll come to the truth. So are you going to show the reader miraculous things happening thoroughly modern surroundings? The next is that. The next point is that, are the miraculous things are happening in the present world? You have to bring that ideology in your writing. So you have to keep all these things in your mind when you write for a child, bringing the fantasy world into the real world. So through fantasy you have to show them the reality of the world in which they are living, and how this theme or the treatment of fantasy should be carried out in the story. So if you have chosen your fantasy aspects, you have to make it believable. So you have to make the child to believe that the fantasy character is realistic. For example, the Superman, the Spider-Man, and now some comic serials or Disneyland, what we come across, that is Chota Beam, or there are many such stories where we come across the realistic, the reality has been brought in those characters. So when you choose a fantasy aspect, but you have to make it that it is believable. So they should believe that what the fantasy character you have portrayed is realistic. And also a fantasy also must have a logical framework. So every story should have a logical framework in that. So without logic, a story cannot go ahead. So do not make your story long. And the other thing we have to keep in our mind is that a story should not be very long. By the time they come to the end of the story, they might have forgotten the beginning, the middle, and the characters also. So always it should be very short and sweet where they can recall the story. And also you have to bring a fantasy is a literary piece. So a fantasy is always a literary piece, and also introduce certain moralities, virtues to be extolled. In all the stories we have to try to bring certain morality and values or virtues should be imparted through those stories, so that if the child listens or reads the story, he'll come to know that what is true and what is false and how he has to be in his lifetime. So always keep in your mind that guard against racial bias. See, when we write a story, it has to have universal appeal. It should be biased from any caste, creed, or society. The universal appeal should be there in all the stories, because we are not writing for a particular caste, creed, or race. So no racial discrimination has to be brought in the story. It should always have a universal appeal, because why we read Shakespeare even today, though it was written 455 years ago, because all his writings as universal appeal. In that way, we have to write the stories keeping the universal perception in our mind, the whole human world in our mind. So concluding advices, you should imagine wonderful things happening to wonderful people. So always we should keep in mind that good things happen to the good people in the story. So all these things has to be pre-designed when we start writing a story. So we should, because we are not going to harm the feelings and emotions of any human being. In that way, the stories have to be composed. So certain things we have to remember when we look into the fantasy world of the child. See, when we start writing, we have to, as I told, we have to step down to the level of a child. We can't communicate to a child as we speak with the same age group of people. So it is more advisable that we should identify ourselves with children's and have a lively sense of wonder. So we should live in the dreamy or the fantasy world of the child. Then only we can learn the skills, or we can learn the mentality of the child, so that we can write according to his understanding. Choose out of a wide variety of forms the one that suits your best style best. So, when you make a choice of the form, you should always give importance to the style. That is, style is nothing but the narrative technique. So, either it is first person or the second person, but always it should be direct. So, give free range to your imaginations in your writing. So, we should not restrict ourselves when we imagine. So, imagination always should be free from everything, any kind of restrictions, bondage, and all those things. So, always we have to imagine freely. And also in your writing, introduce in your story, however faithful it might be, a logic of its own. So, there should be a logic in all the stories when you write for the children's. Without logic, a story cannot be written. And the next point is that write in a language which is picturesque but simple enough to be understood by a child of whatever age you have in mind. So when you start writing, keep in your mind that if it is for the age group of 2 to 4, there you have to give more number of pictures less words. When it comes to the 4 to 6 age, that even the pictures as well as the simple language has to be. So always we should be simplistic in narration as well as in technique and the language what we use in writing for the children. So we have to keep the mind of the child uh, and compose. Remember that fantasy should not only entertain but also instruct and edify. See, when we take up fantasy in the short story, it should not be too entertaining, but it should be entertaining and instructive. So, not too much entertainment, but there should be certain instructions which can be given to the child. So, as a told, we should not right for any particular caste, creed, religion, or society. We have to keep the whole human society in our mind and right because it should have universal perception. The stories which has been written by a writer is not read by his own people, not by his own countrymen, not by his one nations, but it is read by the whole world. So we always should be careful when we write that it has to be read, reread, and see that we have not used certain words which will harm the feelings of other people. Okay, did you get me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Is there any doubts regarding this unit?
No, not now yet.
Not that? Okay. Yeah. The next unit
Yeah. The next year.
talks about the transmission of values. See, values plays a very important role in the human beings. Without values, no human being can exist, I can say. So, values is very important in each and everybody's life. See, children's literature has been not only a source of entertainment, but also a means of transmitting moral and social values to children. Children literature has been not only a source of entertainment. See, what we write, when we write for a children, we are not only entertaining them, but we are transmitting certain values and culture, tradition. See, always we have to impart to our children's the culture, the values and ethics of a society. Even the customs plays a very important role. So in that way, we are transmitting certain morals, social values to the children. See, when we write stories or when we narrate a tale to the child, there we will be teaching certain behavioral attitudes to the child. So, stories and tales have always taught something. So, every story has a morality, or certain ethics, logic will be there in a story. See, ethical and social values are brought home to the understanding of a child by narrating to him tales that capture his imaginations and carry a message for him. See, every story has a message. Every story has some certain ethical values. Through those stories, we have learned certain values and ethics in our life. What we are today is because of the stories what we have listened when we were young. See, because stories molds the child's behavior and his thinking capacity. So it captures the narrating to him tales that capture his imaginations and carries a message for him. So every story, because when a story is narrated to a child imagines according to his perception, according to his psychological thinking. So it may think according to his norms, his traditions and culture. So though a child either he belongs to your country or to my country or to USSR or America or any part of the world, he imagines according to his environment, according to his atmosphere or to the nature in which he has grown up. In that way, imagination plays a very important role in the child. See, the modern writers for children should transmit the values of his own times. See, when a modern writer writes for the child, always he has to keep in mind the values of his own time. How to teach the child who is growing up in this modern world. In that way, when he writes, he has to he has to try to transmit certain values through the modern characters only. If you have seen some of the cartoon networks, there they try to impart certain values through the imaginary characters, though they're fantasy, but still they impart certain values and ethics. In that way, the modern writer always try to transmit the values of his own times. See how to inculcate these social values in children. It's very difficult for the present generation, we can see, because there is lot of behavioral changes because the present child is getting addicted towards the mobile or the TV, we can see. They're more interested in playing the games which comes in the mobile and in the internet rather than reading the books. But we should make them to read the books and get attracted towards the books. So most folk tales point out the truth that each one of us is a complex bundle of contrary qualities. Almost all the intelligent animals and the folk tales of the world have something of importance to say, something to which readers must attach proper significance. As it told, the story of Hare and Tortoise. It is the well-known story which is known all over the world, where the morality or the message it conveys is that the slow and steady wins the race. In that way, so each one of us in this, we are living in a complex bundle of a contrary world, we can see. And when it comes to the present time writing, we can see that there is much of anxiety, stress, which we are undergoing. But through animal world, we can show the present generation how you can modulate your characters. So through certain folk tales, fairy tales, and world have something of important to see. Through them, we can pass on certain messages to which readers must attach proper significance. But there should be certain significances in the reading. The other point we come across is that about the friendship. Most folk tales point out the truth that each one of us in the complex bundle of contrary qualities. See, most of the stories talks about the complexity of the relationship in which we are living. And the other thing is that the friendship and cooperation. See, we can come across the virtues in some of the stories which has been written in the past in India in the Panchatantra stories, or where it exemplifies some known prefaces where it is more appealing than the quality of friendships. So even there, it teaches how a friend in need is a friend indeed. See how the friends will always help his friends. And also we can see that united we stand, divided we fall. So if we are together, none of us can break our relationship. If we are alone, anyone can attack us. So in that way, always unity in diversity, or friend in need is a friend in need. What is the importance of friendship can be taught through certain stories where the child learned the value of relationship. And also the other point is that in quest of a noble goal. See, in the present world or in the present context, we can see that all human beings are in pursuit of one other things in their life. So we can see that the journey is very hazardous and also in pursuit of something noble is often the theme of good and absorbing stories. In order to accomplish something in your life, how you have to go ahead. So there is a saying in English that God helps those who helps not only themselves but others also. See, there is a saying. See, a person should not be very selfish. He has to think about himself as well as his friends and neighbors. Then only you can flourish in a life. So if you're too selfish, when you're in need of help, no one will be there with you. So the quest of a noble goal, always you should be having the motto that the God helps those who helps not only themselves but others also. So, in much of the worlds of mythology or folklore or fairy tales, they present this views very amazingly. And also, some stories like the sun and west of the moon, east of the sun and the west of the moon, the magic carpet, or the flying ship, where we come across certain tales of the foolish but they're lovable by Ivan, and also where it vanishes the cruel Tsar. So, through certain foolishnesses, also we can teach them the value of life can be seen. Next point is about the spirit of adventure, which is very resourcefulness. See, all kind of adventurers are always favorite for the childrens because childrens are lovers of adventurers. Some of the stories we have come across in our lifetime is about the story of Robin Hood, Sinbad, Robinson Crusoe, the Treasure Island, where they talks about where it the stories are about the challenges the protagonist undergo, that is the hero undergo, and also we can see the mysterious islands and also all kind of things happens to the protagonist. So it is more adventurous, and some stories of or more sober and emotional nature also have been favorite of the children's. And the most outstanding among these stories are Little Women and Joe's Boys by Lewis M. Alcott. And class consciousness was also dominated, as may be seen in the Lord Fauntleroy. See, these are some stories where we come across where the children's love the adventurous deeds which are taking place uh, in and around the protagonist. And also, history plays a very important role. Why history is so important? To teach the social values to the children. See, without history, the present society never exists. Everything has a past, a present, and a future. The present is related with the past. So, past is very important. That is, the history is very important. We have to teach our children through historical stories the valor, the courage of the person. So, history as a repository of social values. Childrens all over the world love historical stories. See, we might have heard about Alexander the Great and many such writers who fought for their own nation. In that way, historical stories attracts the children because through historical stories we teach them the values, the patriotism and the spirit of nationalism in them. So, old classics also reflect social concerns. Even the classical stories reflects certain social concerns. For example, the writers in English who have written in the past, like Charles Dickinson, Victor Hugo, Jane Austen, Leo Tolstoy, they brought closer to children through abridged versions and adaptations. Though they write for the elders or the teenagers or the adults, but they brought down those stories according to the understanding of the children's by abridged versions also. The classical stories are also had certain social concerns in their writing. So change social attitude and the new child. See, even we can come across certain changes in the attitude of the new generation, and where we can see that uh, some of the Americans have presented more liberal pictures like Uncle Tom's Cabin, and also David Copperfield, Oliver Twist, and Mark Twain's. They saw some of the stories which talks about the young heroes like Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, and David Copperfield, Oliver Twist, and Mark Twain in Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. And also the boy, well meaning but often rebellious, we can see. And they talk about the wanderlust in his feet and mischiefs in his eyes, was also now abroad even by the adult readers. Even the adult readers have started loving the stories which has been written for the kids, and they had realized that children felt inspired by their own ideals. See, each child has their own ideals on their life, and they get inspired through them. And for example, this new attitude which has been culminated in the writers like Richmal Crompton's William stories, where the character Williams the bad and the William the good talks about some facts which are like unlike like the victories of days, the girls does not know the play of secondary role, or but where even the well girls have taken the place of the protagonist who try to solve the mysteries like Nancy Drew and other characters which come across in the short stories. So there are all kinds of animals who appear in various grabs and amuses the upper grade youngsters as well as the small children. See, even now, many people love to watch Tom and Jerry, Mickey Mouse. See, we can't say that it never the people there are no people who have not liked Tom and Jerry or Mickey Mouse. See, all age group people love to watch Tom and Jerry and Mickey Mouse. In that way, there are certain attitudes in the new children, so certain changes can be sensed in the social attitudes of the present generation. And also folk tales and national life which explore the scientific explanations of the astral bodies. So the present generation childrens love to see the space, because when we look into the Asimova or other writers, they talk much about the scientific world, the technological world, or where it is everything has been digitalized. And so folk tales and also they have the national life, and also they talk about the Milky Way, the galaxies, the planets, all those things. And the sing bong, God leads his cows every day along with this path. The dust raised by the cow sends down the rain. Like that, the stories, the sing back stories, and also a story of this type can never fail to sustain the interest in spite of all the scientific explanations of the astral body. So, how the rain comes, because it is the dust or the cloud, how the cloud is formed in the sky. Like that, there are certain stories which talks about the Milky Ways or the astral world we can see. And many writers have written but these themes in their writing. And also folk tales, and so which consist of scientific explanations. And So certain things we have, as I told, some of the instructions or the rules and regulations has to be followed by the present writers. So who are the beginners who are wanted to become a writer? So first thing, we have to start writing short stories or small tales, folk tales or fairy tales and the fantasy tales, and then move on to the adult world. So first thing is that entertainment is of primary importance in all forms of children's literature. See, by their writing, we wanted to entertain the age group. So always entertainment should become the primary concern in a writing for the children's. And the next thing is that it must have a fluid style, an impressive beginning, and a judicious end. See, when when we start reading a story, once upon a time, we might have read once upon a time there lived a king or a queen. There was a crow in a village, or there was a lion in the forest. Like that, we have done. So it should be always, the beginning should be very impressive, and at the ending should have certain judicious values, truth or ethics or morality or logic should be there. So where it can understand, if I am like this, how I'm going to prosper in my life, or if I'm like this, what's going to happen in my life, how truthful I should be. So in that way, every story should have its, the beginning should be very impressive, and also the ending should be either happy. The style must suit the subject of fairy tale, a historical episode, a modern story of mystery or adventure. All need different styles suitable to them. So different styles or different themes has to be taken up and written. So it varies from uh, a fairy tale, or and if it is an historical episode or a modern story, or which is filled with mystery or adventures, all these stories have a different form and style has to be incorporated in writing. See, we can't write the mysterious stories in a historical methodology. So it varies. There is a style which has to be followed according to the theme what we have chosen. So the next thing is the selection of episode. The selection of episode is very important, because with the objects of infusing in the mind of the child virtues as patriotism, sense of justice and freedom, dislikes of chauvinism. See, all these are very important because it will be infusing in the mind of the child. So, if you wanted to teach them patriotism or nationalism, you have to build that spirit in the story. What is patriotism? What is nationalism? How he should respect the how he should respect his country. All those things has to be taught that. In the same way, if you're teaching the justice and what is freedom and what is chauvinism, the dislike for chauvinism, everything has to be narrated in such a way where you're not harming the beliefs of a child. So even in realistic stories of adventure, an inherent element of justice and fair play must be introduced. So if you're writing an adventurous story, so there should be reality in that. So you should bring to the reality of the life. And also it should not be filled with too much entertainment and far from reality, but it should be with reality. So it has to be impressed on the child's mind that his struggle does not end with himself. So there you should show that the struggle, it's not going to end within himself. So even it is the struggle of some other human being in the world. In such a way, it should end in such a way you should end the story. And the next thing is that we have to remember certain uh, things in our mind. That is the points to remember when we write the values, when we try to uh, talk about the values which we are going to teach the child. And what are the things we have to remember is that the first thing is that how we are going to transmit the values in the child. So children's stories entertain and instruct. See, always the story entertain and instruct. There would be a kind of instruction given in each and every story. Even it should entertain the child, and also there should be a message which reaches the child. The next thing is that the lesson of a story should be implied rather than declared. So it should not be like a declaration, it should always be implied. The story, the lesson of a story, that is the morality or the logic, what we are going to say at the end of the story, always it should be it should be implied, but it should not be like a declaration. So, whether it be real life stories or historical tales or fables and fantasies, they all transmit moral and social values. See, whatever the form it might be, either it is related to life stories or historical tales or fables, fantasies, or fairy tales, or each story transmits its moral and social values like courage, bravery, friendship, humility, cooperation. All these are transmitted through the stories which consist of moral and social values, whatever the form it might be, whatever the theme might be. But the uh, end, it is that there should be a kind of instruction passed on to the child. So, when it comes to the theme of science and technology, where we come across new values are being recognized, the child today is freer and more independent. So, the present generation children are broad minded, or we can say that they're far higher than us, and they always prefer to have freer and more independent. They never want to be dependent upon others. So such kind of stories has to be written for the present child who is completely dependent upon science and technology. So there is no world for them without science and technology. In the same way, the fairy tales still holds the attention of children because of their imaginative quality and their capacity to arouse and satisfy curiosity. So even now, the present children are more attracted towards the imaginations or the fantasy world or the fairy tales, where they are, where it arises their imaginative quality, and also where they can satisfy their curiosities also. And you should, when we start writing the stories with moral values and ethics, we have to keep these things in our mind. So when a writer start, he should know how to capture the child's imagination and hold his interest, and also the style which your writing should suit your subject. It should be simple but not slip sport. And you should choose episodes from history which can communicate such values as patriotism, cultural integration, good citizenship, sense of justice and fair play, love of freedom, spirit of equality, altruism, etc. So when we choose certain episodes, it should be from the, either it's from history or from any other, or it from the society, but everything should impart certain values of patriotism, cultural integrations, good citizenship, sense of justice and fair play, love of freedom, spirit of equality, altruism, and many more things as to be incorporated. So, or each story should have certain values, ethics, and morality in that. See, the last part of this unit is language and illustration. See, language plays a very important role in communication. Why language is important? Without language, we can't communicate. So, though we communicate through signals, signs, and pictography, but communication plays a very important role. Without communication, we can't completely pass on a message. So, what is important is yours that language. All authors of children books know that writing for children is more difficult than writing for adults. So we can see that there are less number of writers who write for the children's. There are many writers who write for the adults group, but there are very less writers who write for the children because it's very difficult and a complicated area we can see. Why it is very complicated? Because the books what we write for children's consist of certain values, morality, ethics, and there should be a message, and we have to step down to the level of a child. Without stepping down to the level of a child, if we write, it will never understand what we are trying to say. So it is more feasible that we should step down to the level of a child and write. So when we write the books of a child, it is very important to step down to that level. And also, the writing for children is very difficult because we have to use the most simplest of the simple language. The language, by language we may not mean not only the choice of words, sentence structure, word order, and grammatical correctness, but also tone and style is very important. See, tone also plays a very important role. The grammar what we use is should be very simplistic, and it should not consist of figure of speeches or grammatical idioms and phrases with more homonyms or homophones where they can't understand. So it is very important to see that the sentence structure is too simple, shoot too short, and not too lengthier one. And always the grammar correctness should be there. And the next thing is using the most telling word, the freshest imagery, the most effective symbols is possible. See, when you narrate a story, we should be very familiar with the word of the child to what they are familiar. Without the familiarization of symbols or signs, we can't write a story. So always you should see that they are not far from imaginary. They can imagine the things what you have told by comparing them to the known objects in and around us. So, when you make a choice of words, you should always give importance to appropriateness. See, appropriateness is very important. Why it is important? Because the concepts, the attitudes, and points of view must be conveyed in appropriate terms. The usage of term is very important. See, you can write a word like ring for an adult, but when it comes to the child, it might you can use the word like bill. So the idea or concept itself should be appropriate and comprehensible to the child in that way. So you should always keep to the concept on your child reader what he is intrinsically, not an adult. So he is a child but not an adult. Certain words, see, when we narrate a particular incident to all the age group, we're not going to convey the subject in the same way as I talk to my elders or to my age group or to my professor or to the younger ones. So even my language undergo changes. So in that way, always we have to keep in the mind that the appropriateness of the term should be used. How to introduce difficult words? See, when you're introducing a difficult word to the child, so it is necessary for you to use a technical expression or a formal utterances of that particular word to the child. So, if you're introducing a a solution, it not by one that children could be expected to understand, but it should be an elegant expression that is rather nice to know, or uh, the formal way of conveying how it is important. So difficult words should not be used, but if you're using a difficult word, it should be made understood by the child. So before introducing any difficult word, be careful that you are writing, but if you write an difficult word, that you should give an explanation in the manner the child can understand. So, whenever you use, the next point is that use of fresh imagery. See, any writers who write, always they keep the work lies in the imagery they chooses. See, the importance of creating fresh similes and metaphors cannot be overemphasized. You should not create any new images or similes or metaphors where the child will not be able to understand. So it is better to give up the case that lose the writers into using such glitches also, and you should make them to use certain words which are known to them. So in that way you can avoid the fresh imageries in usage. And the next point is avoid verbages. What is verbage? See, this verbiage is nothing but the introduction of new phrasal words, or which the phrases that consist of words which, when joined together, appear to be stale and commonplace. For example, golden sunset, or engaging grin, infectious smile or laugh or grin, winding paths, gentle breeze, or pale moon. So such words has to be avoided. And also certain birds, yet another certain words need to be avoided, which are unnecessary prepositions should be avoided, like win out, meet up with, past history, merge together, erupt violently, lose out, join together, small in size. So such verbages should be avoided. And the next thing is how to tighten one writing. So when we write, we have to avoid certain things also. See, tight writing is nothing but it demands to avoid using the same word too many times in the same paragraph, instead of using the same word repeatedly. So that we have to tighten certain words, means repetition of words should not be used in writing. In that way we should be very careful in reproducing the same words repeatedly in the sentence. And next comes the uh, sentence structure. What is sentence structures? See, the structure of sentence is also very important, because we are writing for the children's. So when it comes to the writing of children's, it should not be too lengthy. Avoid very long and obscure brief sentences. So we have to write short sentences, and the sentences should not be very long, where they will not be able to understand the complicatedness of a sentence. So there should be very sentence structure. So we have to incorporate, as in writing for adults, we have sentences must be varied in structure. But when it comes to the writing of a child, we should always keep in the mind that we are writing for the age group of monotonous reading. So it should not be like a monotonous reading, and so we are writing for the children, and the structure should go in such a way there is a connectivity between the sentences. So also we have to avoid grammatical and syntactic pitfalls. See, this is very important. We should avoid grammatical and syntactic pitfalls in a sentence. Intelligible sentences is taking care to avoid dangling participles. For examples like this, running out into the storm, I saw a strange sight. So improper usage of pronouns should be avoided in a sentence. And so always it demands the correct usage of verbs, pronouns, and antecedents where it agrees with the numbers and the pronouns. And the next comes the style and tone. Even this is very important in the writing of a story. Style and tone. See, what is style and tone? Style and tone are to be deferred till the second of year, we can see, because style and tone are delicate and complex elements and often require a great amount of rewriting. See, this is very important. The tone should never undergo change. It should go in the same pace how you have started till the end. So once you have written, you have to reread it for several times and change according to the context and avoid too many modifiers and generalities. So when it comes, you have to avoid too many modifiers. See, modifiers should not be used a lot and general things should not be added too much. Avoid Latin derivatives. What is Latin derivatives? That is nothing but when you write for the children or other or adults, you have to avoid certain Latin words must be replaced with the present pronunciations. So in the past, because there was, if you have read the text which were written by Chaucer or Shakespeare and the present writers, you can see the changes in the uh, derivations or the words the which has been replaced by certain diphthongs or vowel sounds is also. So such Latin derivatives, because Latin is a language which was spoken in the past but not in the present. So such derivatives has to be avoided in the present context. And next comes the tone. So tone is nothing but the style which has been used by every individual writers. It varies from person to person and also from from individual writers. So style is the writer's individuality, is particular flair. Tone is what he strives for in rendering a mood, a setting, or a scene. So if 5 to 6 people are writing a story with the same theme, but their tone undergo changes because it varies from person to person. And also, the author needs to decide what he she wants is a reader to feel. The first thing is that the author has to decide by himself what for whom he is writing, who is the reader, and how he is going to imagine or understand the storyline. And also, if the events that form the story are happy, then the tone needs to be light and careful. So, the events that form the story, either it should be happy or it is cheerful. So, it is should be based on the story itself. So, how you are going to conclude, how you are going to end the story. And the next point is that if the matter is serious, it requires a quieter voice, slow paced sentence, and somber images. So, the story, what you're writing, if it is the actions are more serious, then even the tone undergo changes. If it is bit comical, even the tone and the voice undergo changes in your composition. And the time and place of the story likewise make their own demand. See, time and place plays a very important role in the story, because for whom you're writing and for the if you're writing an incident which is taking place in the forest, the whole story line should go on in the forest itself. Or if it is on a rainy day, you should describe the weather and explain what happens on that particular day. In such a way, time and place plays a very important role in the story. So, children take special delight in sensory details in the sight, sound, smell, taste, and feel of things. So, because children are more imaginative, they are the good graspers of things. They get delight in everything, either it is sensory details or the sight, the sound, the smell, taste, and feel. So we have to try to bring this delight in the child. So that last part is dialogue in fiction. So why dialogue is very important in writing a story? See, language. See, language appears in the form of dialogue. It is well to remember at this point that dialogue is the very moving and lively. Dialogue should be very speed up the story, characterize the speakers, state facts, and give plot information in a livelier way than a narrative will intensify emotions, add flavor, atmosphere, and local color. See why dialogue is important in every story, because the communication takes place between two or more than two people. So what you communicate, it has to reach the other person who is along with you. In that way, so always it should be to the point what you are trying to say. It should not be very complicated where the other person will not understand. The dialogue will speed up the storyline, and also you're making the characters to speak. You're not speaking for the characters are speaking in your story line. So always you state the facts and give plot information in a livelier way. So the story or the facts what you're trying to impart in that storyline, it should be very livelier, where you're entertaining the reader, but you're not putting the reader to complication. So it should be very attractive, or it should where you'll keep the reader in your uh, clips. So intensify emotion. So you should also fill the characters with emotions, feelings. So you have to add certain flavor, atmosphere, and local color to that, to the story. So certain things, the fantasy things or the imaginary things, has to be incorporated in your story with the local colors, because we when we start writing, we bring our culture, our tradition, our customs in a storyline where us children are familiar with that. So we have to keep all these things in our mind when we start writing a story. The next thing is that use simple and appropriate words. As I told, the language or the words what you're trying to use in the story should be very simple and appropriate. Avoid phrases or words which have an adult ring. So certain phrases or words should be avoided, which are most commonly used by the adults. And find an interesting and natural way of introducing difficult words. If you have introduced a difficult word in your story, but you should make the child to understand what it is in a simpler way. So avoid cliches and stale imagery. So try to avoid imageries which are far from their understanding. And as I told, avoid Latin derivatives because it is unnecessary in the present context where the children will not be able to understand. And always keep the sentence and syntax very simple where it reaches the other person. Don't use many modifying words where it create complexities, and try to use certain tone and style which keep the subject in your own. Try to bring exciting experience of your stories and include sensory details which interest children. So always try to see that what attracts the children, what they are interested, what makes them to read the stories, and also see which will excite the children. So nowadays we have seen many cartoons, cartoon serials which has been produced or directed by many producers, which has attracted the children's. In that way, when we start writing a story, we have to keep all these things in a mind. And without, when the beginner should always impart all these qualities when we write for a children. The first thing is the age group for whom we are writing, what his need of the day. If we are writing fantasy, it should not be too far from reality, and each and every stories will impart certain values and ethics. And also the language what we use should be very simple, and no lengthy sentences should be incorporated in writing. Okay, thank you. Here we end this block.
Stop
Stop
presenting.
presenting.
Yeah.
You have any doubts?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am. Okay.